Welcome, friend of the podcast, poet and enthusiast of both spooky and whimsy, LJ Keys.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. You are a first-time published author.
Correct. I am.
And you are releasing a book of poetry called Before I Sleep, Poetry, Prose, and Peculiarity, which comes out Friday, January 29th. First off, love the name. It already gives me an idea of what to expect in between the pages, but I know it is so daunting to put out your first book.
Oh, baby. Yes. Yeah.
And a book of poetry on top of that. Other genres are super hard. I completely concede to that. All genres are very hard to write, but poetry just ups the ante because it's so personal.
Yes, it is very personal, and I won't beat around the bush. This book is very, very personal. Probably the most personal piece of writing I could have decided to publish for the first go. But I've definitely had a struggle with the idea that, people are going to read it now. So it's a struggle, but I'm just so excited that it kind of eclipses all of that.
It is exciting. I know it's something you've been working on for 3 years, finally come to fruition to see it out in the world.
Yeah, I kind of can't believe it. I've been working on it for such a long time that there are moments where I look back at something from a previous revision or something like that, and I'm like, why did I take that poem out? What? I want that poem back in. What was I thinking? Why did I take it out? But I've learned to just kind of trust my past self. And, if I had it in my mind, whatever moment I was in, that poem didn't fit. And I'm going to trust that. Because I like now when I'm a little bit more removed from the piece, it's like, oh no, this would totally fit, blah, blah, blah. But I'm not as in it as I was, at that point. I'm not living the writing in that moment. So
I love that you said that about trusting your past self, because I've been saying that a lot lately. Thanks, past Sarah. Thanks for thinking of that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Past Liesel's got it. She's on it.
Exactly. Now, why pick poetry as a medium for the book?
I've always been a little extra, if you will. I've always really loved writing. I've always been a little floral with my writing, maybe a little sing-songy. I really like playing with rhythm. I actually don't know that much about poetry, if I'm totally honest. So I will preface this book with the fact that I did take a poetry class and they all hated my poetry.
Oh, I feel that in my soul.
Yeah, they hated it with a fiery passion. But it actually was a really great experience because I was able to learn the very important lesson that I'm not writing for everybody.
Well, that's a very important thing to learn.
Yeah, I went through the class, I took their feedback and used it. I learned, I was able to hone some of those skills, but when it boils down to it, the book is for me and the people I care about, and they love it. So I'm fine with that.
And that's the important part, right? As writers, we get lost in our own heads.
Oh my God, it's so true.
It's so hard because we want everyone to like our writing. But the truth is, there are just some people who won't gel or vibe with it.
Yes. And that's okay. Like it was so liberating and freeing when I made that realization, because the first week of class, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing with my life? My worst dreams are coming true. I'm a terrible writer, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, no.
But it's like, no, that's not true. And that's not true for anyone listening to this. If you're a writer, your writing is beautiful and amazing. And I want to say that to everyone.
There you go. If you take nothing else from this episode.
Exactly. If you love it, someone else is going to love it too. And honestly, I really enjoy poetry. My mom really enjoys poetry and just words in general. She introduced me to Robert Frost when I was little. And not everybody loves Robert Frost either. So, but that was really my introduction to poetry. And there was just something that resonated with me. I did also write a lot of very angsty poetry in high school.
I mean, I think we all did just a little,
Yeah, it's really bad. I had a lot of fun going back and reading it recently. And there were actually some lines where I was like, oh my God, I would still use this today. I would write this today, but there were most of the writing though was very just cringeworthy. So cringe.
Oh man. But on your blog, you mentioned that the poems were originally shared with friends in private. How did that process evolve from like sharing with an inner circle to a published illustrated book of poetry?
Therapy.
Easy. Short answer. Therapy. Love it.
Yeah. My one word response to that, therapy. But also my very, very supportive group of friends. I joke that I'll never know if my therapist is my biggest fan, my best friend, or just an amazing therapist. And I'm okay with any of those. So she was a really big proponent. She knew that I liked writing. So she used a lot of prompts to get me to write about my emotions and feel my way through things that I was struggling with. And then I would take my poems into her and read them, and she would be like, oh my gosh, I love that. So it's just with a lot of love coming at me from my people and learning to push that love from inside of me outward, the book just kind of came into being, I guess.
Oh, and I love that. I think that's an underrated piece of the puzzle is advocates, right?
Yeah.
Advocates for us and our writing. I've heard that before from a counselor, that majority of the time they are your advocate. And friends are very much in that similar vein.
Yeah. I mean, let's get real. I have one friend where we are very candid with each other. And in the beginning, with my writing, she would let me know if there was something that she liked or something that she thought could be changed, things like that. It was fine and it worked. It was wonderful. But somewhere along the way, she just decided she was going to be my cheerleader. And the critiques kind of stopped, and she just told me what she loved about every piece that I shared with her. And I think that's a really important place friends have, and that it's okay to ask that of your friends, to say, I can get critiques from these other people, but I need an advocate to even say, like, can you just read this and dote on me? Because it's that whole, when you put something out into the universe, it comes back to you. And I think it's okay to ask for that, because we all need that. We all need someone who loves our writing.
Well, exactly. And to keep us encouraged.
Yes.
Because it can be really difficult, and we can get very disillusioned, I think, with our writing.
Yeah.
I'm with you. I have a whole group text with some writer girlfriends. We'll just pop in and say, hey, I wrote 300 words today. Yay! Right? It's there to help share our accomplishments and just get these positive vibes and feedback.
Yeah. I would be remiss in not mentioning the writers group at the Roanoke Public Library. I had joined that group when I first moved down to Texas, and those gals really changed things for me. I brought in a piece of writing, and it wasn't a piece of poetry. It was just some fiction that I was working on, but they loved it and loved on it. And that was just the kind of group that we had there. We would do critiques, but they were very loving with lots of perspective. And I don't think I would have been able to share my work in the same way with the same confidence had it not been for that group and those people. So definitely big shout out to them.
Okay, so here's your PSA to join a writing group if you haven't yet.
Yes, join a writing group. And there are different kinds of writers groups. You can join one where you will maybe walk away crying every week, but you know that your writing will be better if that's what you want. Or you can join a writers group where they pat you on the head and tell you how good you did and give you a treat. And that's what I needed.
Same here. That's actually how I met my group of writer girlfriends in the group text. The writers group is what changed my mind from making this a hobby to pursuing this as something more serious. It was kind of that light bulb moment for me.
Yes, that's exactly what happened in the writers group. I think that that's what a good writers group does. It propels people forward that want to be propelled forward. And there's, any kind of writers group in between too, what we've talked about, So yes, highly recommend.
Now, we touched on it a little earlier, but the poems in Before I Sleep are crafted for a rich, visceral experience, all with varying degrees of the psychological. How did you decide on which poems made it into the book? And did you have to cut any?
Gosh, it was a really difficult process. I ended up picking poems that I felt pertained to what was happening in the parts, the short story pieces of the book. And I say in the verbiage on the back of the book that the poems reflect pieces of my journey, the author, and Echo, the character in the book, her journey too. And I don't know if you saw the latest remake of Little Women. There's a scene where Jo is a writer and she spread these papers all over the floor. And I was watching this as a writer, like, oh, that would actually be like really helpful in certain circumstances. So sure enough, when I was picking poems, I spread them all out on the floor. I actually have pictures of it because I just felt that was also very extra. So
Nice.
Yes, had to capture a memory of it. But I just spread everything out. I went through them, and that was also how I put them in order. I just kind of looked at them like a sea, and I was fishing. It was really hard, but really fun.
And I guess I didn't realize the book had been a serious work in progress for about 3 years. And I like how you've broken out the books into different sections. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
So I wrote chunks of it at various times. I really piecemealed it all together. Even Steve, my editor, the noveldoctor.com, he edited the first 10,000 words of my short story that's in the book like 2.5 years ago, long time ago. So the book is kind of set up with a prologue, which is a very poem-y short story about caving. And it's basically a metaphor for therapy. And then the woods is the initial story. In the woods is where I talk about myself as a child, and I do some inner child work and kind of sort through some of those big emotions, some past traumas, things like that. And then go into a chunk of poetry. And then in the garden is where I meet myself as an old woman. And it's kind of looking at what kind of person I want to be. what I want my life to look like, all those kind of things, things that I need to work on in order to get there myself. And then another chunk of poems. And then in the rooms is kind of me dealing with the perceptions of what I think other people's perceptions are of me. It's still kind of this thing where it's all happening within my head. So it's not actually these other people, it's my interpretation of these people. I have always had issues with self-worth and things like that. It's kind of like sometimes you can get lost in what you think someone else is thinking about you rather than what they're actually thinking about you. And so kind of dealing with that and the perception of that and kind of letting go of some of those things. And then another chunk of poems. And then in the mirror, part 4 is where I am dealing with myself present day. So I'm basically dealing with my own reflection and kind of what that looks like, to have a conversation with yourself.
And so was it in the mirror section that you took that amazing author bio photo?
Yes. It was really funny because I like went into the room and was like, okay, I'm just going to be in this room. Don't think I'm weird. I'm just going to close the door and turn off all the lights and light this candle and stare in a mirror. So yeah, I set up the mirror and just decided to be super weird and a little emo for a while. And I did exactly that. I turned off all the lights, lit my candle, and just stared at myself in the mirror.
Like my 13-year-old self understands exactly where you're coming from.
I know. But it was for a lot of different reasons. I wanted to see how the light played on my face, how I see things out of the corner of my eye in low lighting. Just kind of wanted to get myself in the headspace because there was a part that I was struggling with. So yeah, but of course I couldn't pass up the opportunity for a photo.
It was really amazing light. And I love that it goes very much in line with the theme. So, I mean, it's perfect. It really is.
I played with the idea of using an actual image of myself because I do have pictures that I took a while back for that kind of thing. And there's like some of them are on my blog, but then I just had that one and it was like, no, I'm just going to be my angsty teenage self.
And I appreciate that. I love when people get a little playful instead of just, the very standard smiley pic. I mean, I appreciate those too, but this picture goes along so well. And the fact that it was taken in the midst of the writing just makes it that much better.
It was so much fun. And I do have to say, I think that all the people that I had the opportunity to work with on this book helped me make it look so polished and so professional that I felt I could get away with doing this fun thing. Like I don't feel like I have to talk up the book in those regards because everything is breathtaking, to look at it, which I had nothing to do with how it looks. The writing is me, but everything else is this really wonderful group of people.
like your illustrator who posted on Instagram some of the illustrations he'd been working on for your book.
Yes. And I actually found him on Instagram and it's been really fun working with him. He's in France, so there's like a little time difference. So that, made me feel like real fancy. But I liked his stuff on Instagram and reached out to him and he was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'd love to do a commission. So yeah, it's incredible. He does amazing work. And initially, this was actually 2 separate projects. So the stories, the parts, as I call them, were actually a separate entity, and they were going to be a full-length novel. And actually, I should say their inception was actually a therapy prompt. Like I mentioned earlier, I kept coming up against this wall in therapy and I just couldn't get around it. So my therapist was like, hey, you should write about the wall. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what that, looked like, whatever. Like, how do I write about the wall? It's there, it's stone or something, whatever. I'm extra enough that I was able to just kind of run with the concept. And I ended up writing this story about a girl who's wandering through the woods and kind of gets lost and meets herself as a child. And, she sees the wall before anything strange or creepy, starts happening. And it's so tall, she can't see the top of it. It's so wide, she can't walk, to the end of it. She goes both directions and can't find her way through it. And then she meets this little girl and the story continues. And I've talked about it in the past that, I got through the wall, and that's all in part one. So now there are 3 more parts after that, which were unexpected. But that's a therapy thing. Like, you always think that this is the layer you're going to be done. Oh, I'm done with therapy now. But there's always another layer. And I had these poems that I was just going to do a straight book of poetry. And because I was writing about the same topics in the poems as in the stories, I just thought, why not? What would happen if I combined them? And so I started looking at how to do that. And initially I had the entire story together and then just all of the poems in a chunk at the end. And somewhere along the way, I thought it might be cool to kind of intersperse them. So the poems are broken up into sections, the beginning, present, ongoing, and home. So each of the poems reflect some kind of movement forward for me and for the character.
Well, I love that. And I love the fact that you actually incorporated a theme in the book and a through line so that we have a character that we have the opportunity to follow. Someone to gravitate to and identify with.
Definitely. I'm really interested to see how people react to it, because I think that for some of my beta readers, it was kind of like breaking it up, breaks up the story for your reader too. So it kind of pulls you out. But for me personally, I'm the same. I think the same way. Sometimes in a poetry book, I get a little lost myself because you can kind of pick it up and read one here, read one there. And that's what I love about a poetry book. But this one, it kind of offers you the best of both worlds, to me personally, I think.
And I love this idea of something that's kind of interconnected, but you can enjoy it on its own as well. You can appreciate in its own right, but has a little thread just kind of woven through it ever so slightly to keep all the stories together. It's a beautiful tapestry if we are using some imagery there. I didn't know that this was a therapy prompt that got you to this place of writing more about the poetry. Because it's so funny. As writers, we sometimes write down our ideas and we think it's a throwaway idea, right? And sure enough, it comes back or it sticks with you and you find yourself writing a whole story or book of poetry around this one idea or concept. It kind of reminds me of Stephen King's On Writing.
Oh my gosh, I love that book. Everyone go read it.
Absolutely. Go check it out at your local library, plug here. It's amazing. But it reminds me of the story of Carrie, his first book that really set his career off.
Yes.
It was a throwaway idea. He typed it out, didn't like the idea and didn't like where it was going and threw it away.
Mm-hmm.
His wife actually fished it out of the trash, read it, and she said, no, you have something here.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of goes back to what we were saying about having advocates. You
Mm-hmm.
think sometimes your ideas or prompts are throwaway ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and you need someone to help push you along with,
Mm-hmm.
making those ideas come to fruition. Which makes me think, being a writer and all, do you also have a love affair with notebooks or journals?
Oh my gosh, it's such a problem.
Same,
So
same.
not only notebooks and stationery and paper, but just like basically all office supplies, because notebooks are definitely the worst. But I will use index cards, post-it notes, things like that for different pieces of writing. And but for notebooks specifically, I've actually had to like pretend that I don't like them anymore. So people stop getting them from me because I have so many right now. And I still buy them for myself too, because I'm a crazy person. So yeah, so many.
Do you like, I have the same problem. I completely understand that. But like, just so many I use.
So many.
Do you have any tips for capturing those like inspirational ideas?
I think don't be afraid to take a minute to write something down, because even if you're in a rush to go somewhere, you're in front of people, whatever, you're never going to regret taking the time to write down something really quick. And if somebody makes a big deal about you doing that, you're a writer. And if they're not, maybe they don't understand, but you are, and that's what you do. That's a part of your job, to keep track of those things, I feel, for myself anyway. I also think something that kind of took some pressure off of me is the whole concept that what is for you won't pass you by. And so I'll jot things down and try not to think about them too hard as I'm writing them down, because I know that when they're meant to, they're going to come back up for me. I'll come back to that notebook at some point, because it just happens time and time again. I'll forget about something, and then something weird happens, and I clean out my purse and there's this notebook, and it's like 3 months after, and I wrote something down, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that would be the perfect poem. But don't put pressure on yourself to like write down the exact perfect thing or to use it that day or something like that. You can just jot it down.
And that's such a great piece of advice. And I completely agree with you, because sometimes we've actually talked about it on the podcast. Sometimes it's about having that right experience. We have a great idea, but may not be able to write it quite yet. We need the right tools in our tool belt, as Stephen King would say.
Yes. And that is basically this entire book. Like I wrote so many of these poems when I first moved to Texas, and we moved away from all of our family and friends. And I was just kind of secluded and very in my head and all these kind of things. I just started to make friends here and find a community. It was like suddenly I had the tools to continue that process. And the revisions of the poems were, for me personally, it was like this epic experience, because I wrote these ideas and just got to watch them kind of set on fire in front of me in the most awesome way. Because it was like, I learned this technique, or I really liked this part of the book that I read, so I'm going to incorporate that concept. And I just kind of dove more into writing and more into my psyche, also in therapy. And that just gave me even more tools that I kind of then was able to hone my writing with, and, figure out what it was that I really wanted to say to myself.
And I think we underestimate that a lot of times, that we have these amazing ideas, but they don't have to be utilized at that very moment.
Yeah.
I think we fear it's going to, just run away from us if we don't use it at that moment, but maybe we're not quite ready.
Absolutely. And again, I feel like it comes back to this, my personal favorite mantra right now: what is for me will not pass me by. Because it is the truth. I know that it probably sounds a little Pollyanna, because then you don't have to worry about things as much or whatever. But for me, it's such a good reminder that as you're moving forward, it gives you the freedom to follow your gut, to let yourself be led in a direction. And when that happens, you're going to find the pieces to put the puzzle together.
And were you led to a theme before writing, or did it kind of appear during the writing process?
It definitely appeared during the writing process, because as we talked about, these were all separate entities where I was working through things in therapy and writing about different emotions and all that kind of thing. I mean, if I were to pick a theme, a one-word theme, I would say catharsis. Because over the past 3 years, I have had some big changes in my personal life and some hard things, and learning how to cope with those things, and things from when I was a kid too. And that's something I would love to say to people as well, is that you can have a great childhood and have loving families and loving people in your life, and there are still things you're going to need to heal from. There are still things you will just need to work through, because we're all just humans. Our parents are too. And so I think it's a good thing to remember that no one has it figured out, literally no one. And there are just always things that we can take a closer look at inside of ourselves. And that's really what I was doing. In this whole process, I was just peeling back layers of myself and getting to know myself better, and learning what makes me tick.
And you know what? I think that's why I enjoy poetry mostly, is because it does have the power to look inward as opposed to outward. I feel like when you write a novel or almost any other genre, you look more outward, right, for inspiration. Poetry, though, is like looking of the inward to you. And sometimes you're surprised where it goes.
Yeah. Honestly, the more random, the better for a prompt. I feel, especially with poetry, that has been some of my absolute favorite things to write, have been when I was just sitting, looking around a room and something caught my eye, and I just focused on that thing and wrote a poem about it. It's amazing, because even in a short poem, they have a beginning, middle, and end. There's an entire story housed in a poem, in poems. And it's interesting too, because you have to be so much more careful with your words to fit into these certain houses that are familiar within poetry. And I mean, I guess that's another thing I'll say about my book, is that it's very non-traditional poetry. But it's really fun when it kind of goes off the rails. Like it's one of my favorite things. It's so cool to just kind of let the poem lead you wherever it goes. And sometimes it's to a really dark place. Sometimes it's to a very bright place. And then my favorite thing is when, you kind of have this callback at the end of the poem, that, to the beginning. And it's kind of, it can sometimes add this air of humor or something like that. I actually have a poem that I'd love to share, and it's one that kind of starts out one way and goes into this very weird, dark place. And then it kind of has this comedic relief at the end. So, it's a journey.
Awesome. And so do you want to go ahead and read that poem?
Oh, sure. I would love to. So this poem is called My Molasses Cookies and Other Things I'm Good At. Melted margarine, refined sugar, a beaten egg mixed smooth, sand after a wave. Cloves remind me of Christmas, ground ginger, yellow raindrops on white flour. Cinnamon smells like big red gum filling my kitchen with the spiced smoke of a memory. Molasses slips out of my hand's broken glass, prismed pool of day-old blood slipping down grout lines or seeping up. I am also under the kitchen floor, reaching through sticky sugar and tile, a corpse oozing sweet hot sludge. Holding my own ankle, struggling to write poems on the kickboards where only I will see. About time wasted and pretending I'm wasted on non-alcoholic wine spritzers. Mixing and baking my legendary cookies using Susan's recipe from Pinterest.
I do like the ending. It's it's just chef's kiss perfection.
Yeah. So that kind of goes all over the place. I feel like that poem in particular is a really good one because for this topic, because you're in the kitchen, it's just a normal day. It's maybe a little bit floury in the description of the baking, of baking cookies. And then all of a sudden something happens and there's blood on the floor. What? And then you're under the floor reaching up. And this is another one too, where the artist, Luc Bardi, he's on Instagram. He got, oh my gosh, he just did some really gorgeous work in this book and for this piece especially. And I gave him prompts for the images and kind of took little sections out of the writing and sent them to him. And so I sent this poem and, he has the sludge on the ground and, there's this thing reaching up through and writing on the kickboards and holding the ankle. And it's just so cool. And I just love the poem because it's so intense. It's like this jarring moment when you hear Susan's recipe from Pinterest. I mean, it's just so silly. I love it.
I do love how you subvert the expectation because you set it up to be like this kind of very homey, quintessential baking moment, and then it just takes a turn.
I think that it's interesting. Like, am I the person cooking? Am I the person that's under the floorboards? What's real and what's not? I like the line too about pretending I'm drunk on non-alcoholic wine spritzers. I also liked the idea of exploring what a housewife is and, what the darker side of that might be too. And I was just exploring a lot of different themes with this poem, particularly.
And as you were writing some of these poems, did you have any discoveries about your writing?
Oh my gosh, thousands. I'm not even sure how to narrow it. I discovered that there are different ways that I like to write poetry. So you'll see some of them in this book are very rhymey and maybe more traditional, and some don't rhyme at all. And the lines are broken in a way that sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. I definitely write by feeling, which I think is why it resonates with some people and doesn't with others. But in my experience so far, people that have read it, if they like it, they love it, because it hits you where your feelings are born. Or they just hate it because it doesn't follow any of the constructs of poetry.
But I think that's kind of the point of poetry, right? It's supposed to hit a nerve. I I, I completely agree. It's got to resonate on some level.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of discomfort in this book. And I like that about it, because there are certain things that pull you out of the writing. And that's what I want. I want you to be back in your body at the same time that you're feeling my emotions. There's something I love about that.
I know you offer services as a freelance editor. How do you edit poetry in regards to that emotional piece?
So I think that editing poetry is particularly challenging. And I think as an editor myself, my main focus in editing is to maintain the voice of the author. And I think that with poetry, it's very easy to remove that voice. And so there needs to be a lot of communication, especially for poetry. And the editor and proofreader that I worked with, thankfully, are both incredibly thoughtful humans and were able to kind of look at the work as a greater piece. And, they didn't just look at whether it's grammatically correct, but whether you feel it in your heart, so there's different thinking about the rhythm of a sentence. You think about music, how many different kinds of music there are and different beats and all those things. And certain ones people like and others don't like. Even some of the beats in poetry, I would receive a suggestion and kind of be like, I can't change that. I think it's so important as a writer to remember that these editors are making suggestions. And I say this to my clients every time, is that I am giving you information. It's up to you what you do with that. You can throw my work out the window if you want. I will not be offended because that's your baby. Like you have to do what you think is best for the piece. And all I'm doing is giving you this information. And so I think it's also important to remember as a writer that you get to make the final decision. And it's also important to find an editor that works with you, because one editor versus another, you could have a completely different story, completely different poem, completely different book, everything. So taking your time when picking an editor too, I think is good. And I know for me personally, I'm never upset if someone decides not to work with me, because I think that if everyone forced themselves to work with me and we didn't really connect, it would be a nightmare for both of us. So I don't ever worry about that. I think there's plenty of people that are going to click, and, those are the people you work with.
And so now that people know all about your poetry, where can they find your book?
So I am publishing through Ingram Spark, and I will be posting about it on my blog. There will also be a link through there. So it's www.ljkeys.com. You can also follow me on Instagram. I will have stuff on there. It's at LJ and the Keys. And yeah, I'm really excited. I can't believe that we're already here.
I know, right? It's just finally, after all these years, comes to this moment.
Yes.
And did you want to shout out anyone else?
I do. I would love to shout out some people. So I think you said we were going to put them in the notes of the podcast anyway. So I'll just say Luc Bardi, who's on Instagram, did my internal illustrations, and they are just amazing, breathtaking. I love them. Rob Halhead did my cover and just gorgeous artwork. Steve Perlini did my editing, noveldoctor.com. He's great. And Kraken Editing did my proofreading. And then Bookow.com did my formatting and typesetting. And especially for a poetry book, that can get a little wacky, and they were very patient with me. So all of these people were so incredibly patient. And all of these people were so incredibly patient with me and are all so ridiculously talented. I am just wildly honored to have been able to bring them into this project. So thank you to them.
Fantastic. Thank you for being part of the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Congrats to LJ Keys on the book launch. Always a blast to chat about poetry and a little bit of the strange and unusual. Book recommendations for this episode: Before I Sleep, Poetry, Prose, and Peculiarity by LJ Keys. I hope you stay safe, healthy, and keep writing. Bye!